Hello, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my annual video where I rank every single European national team over the calendar year. I've done this series since 2021 and you guys really seem to enjoy it. But for those of you that are new to the channel and don't really know how this works, this ranking is based off of every single European country's performances only in the 2024 calendar year. Obviously, some countries played in the Euro 2024 tournament, others did not. So each ranking is really independent of one another, as either way, I'm really basing it off of standards for each of the national teams. I don't want to give way too much away early on, but just an early example. On paper, you can argue Belgium are one of the best national teams in the world. In fact, FIFA ranked them as top 10, but their performances this season did not really suggest that they were. There are many underdogs that are ranked lower than FIFA that you can argue had a better year than Belgium, so they'll probably receive a higher grade on this video. But either way, this is just my personal list. As always, let me know yours in the comments below. Don't forget to drop an early like. And I have no idea when this video will actually be uploaded. Obviously, I'm just trying to get it out before 2025 begins. Happy holidays and happy new year to you all. As you can see, I'm not in my usual setting. I did want to record this video a lot earlier, but I got very sick and then I traveled quickly after. And I got a big month of traveling ahead, but I still plan to upload a lot of videos. Just in terms of the room I'm recording in, it's not the most ideal setting. But regardless, let's get into it. Going somewhat alphabetically, definitely subject to change as we go on through the video. Starting off with Albania. The Albanian national team went into 2024 with a lot of confidence after topping their Euro qualifier group. Obviously, they were devastated to see their actual Euro group. Not a lot of expectation was there from many other people, but the Albanians still believed and put off fantastic fights throughout, only losing by 1 goal against Italy and Spain and ended up drawing with Croatia. They finished last in the group, but still, it was definitely an admirable effort many fans will not forget. We even saw them break records in the tournament, including scoring the fastest goal in Euro history. So with decent progression, it looked to still be promising times for Albania. However, unfortunately, they were put in quite a difficult Nations League group for League B standards, with Czechia, Ukraine, and Georgia. Many Albanian fans were still going in confident though. In the Euro qualifiers, they were in the same group as Czechia and managed to beat them there. And on the first match day of the group stage, they were able to beat Ukraine. However, unfortunately then their form started to fall. A loss to Georgia and a 2-0 loss to Czechia. They bounced back against Georgia the next time they faced, along with drawing with Czechia 0-0, but then lost to Ukraine. So the point gap was very close in this group, but still they were only able to grab 2 wins. They shared points with Georgia, but had a worse goal difference. Obviously, it was a very difficult group, but I still think Albania could have done better. Also forgot to mention, in the 4 friendlies they played prior to the Euros, they lost to the more difficult opponents Chile and Sweden, but did defeat Liechtenstein and Azerbaijan. Obviously, Albania did not achieve what they wanted to in 2024, but I wouldn't say it was the most dreadful of a year. Still, I think the standards should be higher, and they can go into 2025 with some confidence. But right now, I think it's safe to put them at the D tier, considering we have S to F. Let's move on now to Andorra. I don't think I'm going to go into as much depth as I do with Albania on this country, as their only victory, while not facing the toughest of opponents, was against San Marino 2-0. Obviously, this country do not have the highest of standards already in the football world, but I still think this was a failure of a year for them. I'm putting them at F. Let's move on now to Armenia. Armenia, going into 2024, knew that they failed to qualify for the Euros, obviously, under their new manager, Alexander Petrokov, who previously managed Ukraine and did quite well there, so people still had high expectations for him. Unfortunately, in the Nations League, they heavily crumbled. Yes, they finished second place, but by quite the point margin against Macedonia, losing head-to-head twice against them as well. They also failed to beat the Faroe Islands at all. Their only victories in the Nations League campaign were against Latvia, and they also managed to beat Kazakhstan in a friendly. I think Armenia definitely had higher standards than that, so I'm going to be putting them at D. Moving on now to Austria. Very interesting country to analyze this year, as they topped their Euro group over France and the Netherlands. Unfortunately though, they did get knocked out of the round of 16 to Turkey. Still, it was definitely a very memorable run, and this side played some fantastic football. Following that, in the Nations League, they finished second place, just falling short at the end to Norway, despite being able to beat them in one of the matches 5-1. Norway beat them in the other 2-1, and also they drew to Slovenia on the last match day, which had Norway advance over them with more points. But the country only picked up 3 losses this year. In their friendlies prior to the Euros, they got some incredible results, like defeating Turkey 6-1. So it was quite surprising that they couldn't beat them again. Austria definitely had some shortcomings throughout the year and seemed to kind of struggle to find a solid execution to kind of solidify more of expectations, if that makes any sense. Because they should have done better than the round of 16 at the Euros, and they should have strived to top that Nations League group. It still was a really promising year under Ralf Rangnick though, and I'm really curious to see what this side continue to do going forward. Even though they could have done a bit better in the Nations League and finished further in the Euros, I still think that they shot a bit above their weight so I'm going to be putting Austria at A. Next up, let's move on to Azerbaijan. Their only 2 wins this year were a friendly against Mongolia and Kazakhstan. Not much expectation from this side, of course, but they also had some hefty defeats, like losing to Sweden 6-0. I think it's safe to put this country at the bottom tier. Yeah, we're definitely not having the best start to this video, and it's not going to be any better as we now move on to Bosnia. If you saw my recent short I filmed prior to leaving for this trip, Bosnia on record had the worst year out of any of the European national teams, as they failed to grab a single win out of all of 2024. To be fair, they had one of the toughest schedules. It all started with their playoff loss in the Euro qualifiers against Ukraine. A narrow defeat, but it just seemed to kind of ruin all the spirit. Then prior to the Euro tournament, they played a friendly against England where they lost 3-0. Then they were in League A of the Nations League as they had a lot of success in the last one, which put them in a very challenging group with Germany, Netherlands, and Hungary. When they traveled to the Netherlands, they conceded 5, and when they traveled to Germany, they conceded 7. Their only matches that did not finish as losses were 2 draws against Hungary and the Netherlands. So yes, many other countries did have a more favorable schedule than them, but there's no denying the fact stands. They didn't pick up a single win, so I'm going to have to put them at F. But Bosnia should stay hopeful going into 2025 as their World Cup qualifier group does not look so deadly. But that being said, their Euro qualifier group was one of the easier ones to get, and they still did very poorly there as well. There's a lot of mess going into the FA, but it's also kind of hard to analyze this team right now as, yeah, this schedule was a nightmare. But either way, they should focus on their football instead of traveling to amusement parks when traveling away to Germany. The results speak for themselves. And still, this video is not going to get any better with these rankings as we move on now to Belgium. Belgium, obviously, as we talked about for some years now, are definitely having a disintegrating golden generation. Defense is definitely a lot weaker now, and it has shown. In the Euros, they had a very, very doable group, and they couldn't top it. They shared points with everybody else, but they lost to Slovakia at the beginning. They picked themselves up against Romania in the next match, but then drew with Ukraine with a 0-0 scoreline, while also playing for that type of result, which was a bit odd. They immediately got knocked down in the round of 16 to France 1-0, and in the Nations League, look at that point difference from France and Italy. They shared points with Israel at the end, as this side lost to them on the final match day. Their only win as well was against Israel. It was really such a crisis though, as the FA really had an emergency meeting whether or not they needed to sack Tedesco. I mean, even before his arrival, there were definitely some question marks behind the scenes with the national team, but since Tedesco's arrival, we even saw the likes of Courtois refuse to play once again. This definitely has not been a good year for Belgium, but either way, at least they made it out of their group in Euro 2024. It wasn't an absolute failure. I'm going to be putting this side, despite them going through a lot of troubling times, at D. Moving on now to Belarus. I think overall this was quite a disappointing year for Belarus. They only got 1 win against Luxembourg in the Nations League. Definitely not an easy group, but it was also a doable one. They picked up quite a lot of draws, but also had some heavy losses like losing to Russia 4-0 in a friendly, along with Israel 4-0. Sorry Belarus, not good enough. I'm definitely putting you guys at F. Let's move on to Bulgaria though, who are in the same Nations League group as them. Bulgaria picked up loads of draws, which was honestly quite interesting. They managed to beat Northern Ireland once, but the other time they faced Northern Ireland, they got annihilated 5-0. And that was their only loss all of 2024. The side definitely needs to improve on their attacking football without a doubt, as they did not have a single match where they scored more than 1 goal. Most of the time they only conceded 1 as well, apart from facing Northern Ireland. I don't know what to give them honestly. The fact that they only lost to Northern Ireland once is quite interesting, but 5-0 is quite a high scoreline. If it weren't so high, I probably would have put them at C, but considering it was such a heavy loss, I'm going to be putting this side at D. Let's move on to a very interesting year for Croatia. 2024 looked to be bright for this side. Yes, they knew they were going into a very challenging Euro group, but prior they won the International Capital Cup in Egypt, which are basically glorified friendlies, but still, technically the national team's first ever trophy. Following that, the friendlies prior to the Euros, they defeated Macedonia 3-0 and also Portugal. Things were looking good for Croatia. But in the Euros, they just totally slowed down. They looked asleep at moments in the group stage, and it started off with the heavy loss against Spain, 3-0, then drawing with Albania 2-2. Too many mistakes in that match. It was all down to that final match against Italy, where it was a must-win to advance to the knockouts. It looked to be coming true. Croatia were 1-0 up after Luka Modric scored early in the second half, but Italy scored a stoppage time equalizer to deny any hope. The only thing going for Croatia in that match is that they still are undefeated against Italy in all competitions, but Italy still got the last laugh, advancing to the round of 16. Croatia sent home too early in that tournament. In the Nations League, they somewhat bounced back though. Now obviously I'm disappointed with my national team. It should have been a lot better. We should have at least made it to the knockouts of the Euros. Some of it was definitely just playing poor, but some was also just unfortunate luck. I do think with all things considered, the fact that Croatia made it to the Nations League quarterfinals and they had a strong start to 2024, just left completely disappointed at the Euros, makes me think they are granted at least a C. Before you criticize me on that one, let's finish the rest of the list, please. Let's move on now to Cyprus. The only notable things this country was able to achieve was defeating Lithuania twice in the Nations League head-to-head. They also beat San Marino 4-1 in a friendly. But they conceded quite a lot of goals to many other national teams, including 7 in total to Kosovo. Considering they didn't necessarily have the most challenging schedule either, I'm going to be putting them at the bottom. Alright, let's move on to Czechia now. Earlier I would have said this side are at the bottom for sure, as they didn't do really well in their Euro group, finishing last place even under debutants Georgia. They failed to beat any of the teams despite putting off some close fights. In the Nations League as well, they had to face Georgia again and had a heavy loss, but they redeemed themselves very well, getting some massive wins to top their group. It's nice to see them still trusting their manager Ivan Hasek. This side were definitely going through some worrying times, but they're starting to build the momentum once again. I would say that Czechia did redeem themselves towards the end of the year for me to put them at C. Also, not to mention they won all their friendlies prior to the Euros, and I know it doesn't weigh as much as the Euros, but still, if they did better in the actual Euro tournament, I'll put them higher. I think C is a fair grade. Moving on to Denmark. They were undefeated in their friendlies prior to the Euros, and in the actual tournament, they drew every single one of their matches in the group stage, failing to show much of a goal-scoring threat, only scoring 1 goal against Slovenia and then 1 against England. Still, they advanced the knockouts, but unfortunately they had to face a very informed Germany, losing 2-0 there, despite putting off a very good fight, even having some controversy not going their way. In the Nations League, they were put in a challenging group, once again having to meet with Serbia just like in the Euro group. They beat both Serbia and Switzerland once, drew with them the other 2 times they faced, and the only side they unsurprisingly lost to was Spain. I don't necessarily think anything really went wrong for Denmark this year. Maybe there were moments they could have done better, but overall, considering their standards, nothing too shocking, especially with that round of 16 exit at the Euros, losing to Germany. Not too surprising at all. I'm going to be putting this country at B. Moving on to Estonia next. They got heavy losses, including losing to Poland in the Euro qualifier playoffs 5-1. No offense to them, but it was already a bit surprising that they were there in the playoffs in the first place. It was due to their Nations League results, but still. They got some massive wins this year though, including defeating the Faroe Islands 4-1 in the Baltic Cup semi-final, and also defeated Lithuania on penalties in the final. In the Nations League, their only win came against Azerbaijan once, the other time they drew to them. So really it depends how much you want to weigh that Baltic Cup, but I don't want to weigh it way too highly. I think Estonia still did not really exceed expectations this year. I'm going to be putting them at D. Moving on now to the Faroe Islands. I've been appreciating this side because although they most of the time finish towards the bottom in many standings throughout the years, they still have at least one interesting showing against a respectable national team. And this time it was against Armenia, where they were able to defeat them in the Nations League. Even then, they still drew with Macedonia 1 time, and early in the year scored 4 goals against Liechtenstein. They definitely did not have the best record throughout the year, but still, some notable fights and enough for me to not put them all the way at the bottom. I'm going to be giving them a D as well. Moving on now to Finland. Their only win registered in 2024 was a friendly against Estonia. They had way too many heavy losses, including the Euro qualifier playoffs to Wales, losing 4-1, followed with conceding a lot of goals to England and Greece in the Nations League, narrow fights against Ireland, but still lost at the end of the day. Very poor year from Finland. Their manager Kanerva has stepped down though, so we'll see how they develop in 2025. But for me, this is definitely an F. Alright, it's time to move on to a European giant, France. When you look at the progression over 2024, you can't necessarily say it was a bad year. Euro semi-finalists and topping their Nations League group. But a lot of criticism was thrown at them for failing to score a lot of goals at the Euro tournament. It took them a very long time to score from open play, and were just narrowly passing through teams. There's definitely also something going on behind the scenes. Deschamps does not really look solidified with the players. He left out Mbappe in one of the Nations League breaks. He even made some interesting comments about Saliba prior to the Euro tournament. Obviously, France are always going to expect to win silverware given the quality they have on paper It's one of the best sides in the world without a doubt. Although they did show some flaws here and there, and Rabiot did learn some important life lessons at the Euros, I still think the year could have been worse for them, and overall it was alright, so I'm going to be putting them at A. Let's move on to one of the Euro debutants, Georgia. This side should definitely be proud of the year they had. First of all, they qualified for the Euro tournament via playoffs, defeating Luxembourg and Greece on penalties. That all happened in 2024. And in the Euro tournament, they finished third place, allowing them to advance to the knockouts. And of the teams they managed to beat, it was Portugal. Yes, they were not playing their strongest lineup, but still, you could tell they wanted to win that match, and Ronaldo looked absolutely frustrated throughout. Yes, they lost to Spain immediately in the knockouts, but those were the Euro champions and already have a great resume against Georgia, unfortunately. Regardless of getting knocked out so soon, Mamardashvili set records to become the best goalkeeper at the tournament. And in the Nations League, yes, they shared points with last place Albania, but they still put off good fights throughout, including defeating Czechia at the very beginning by a massive scoreline. Although they did end up slipping, I still think overall this year was fantastic for Georgian football. We'll see if they can continue forward, but they have every reason to be proud right now. I think that if it weren't for that Nations League slip, we should put them all the way at the top. But regardless, those Euro achievements were phenomenal. Qualifying for the Euros in the first place, they should be proud of. I'm putting Georgia at A. Moving on now to Germany. Germany became such a massive talking point in 2024. Obviously being the host of the Euro tournament, many eyes were on them, and they weren't in the best form in 2023. But they heavily picked themselves back up. They were in explosive form in their friendlies prior to the tournament, in 2024 specifically though. And in the actual Euro tournament, they were regarded as one of the best teams, finishing with the group stage results, after one of the most one-sided opening matches, destroying Scotland 5-1. They were unfortunate to face Spain so soon in the quarterfinals. If not, this side seemed destined to at least make it to the final in their own home soil. And that match was extremely close. There's still debate that maybe Germany should have advanced instead. But yeah, in the Nations League, the incredible form continued under Nagelsmann. Both times they played at home against Hungary and Bosnia, they smashed the other side 5-0 and 7-0. They also managed to beat Netherlands once head-to-head. The side's definitely going through a transitional period, but there's a lot of exciting youngsters in the scene that can definitely flourish going forward. I think Germany have had a fantastic year. What's interesting is their only loss the entire year was against Spain in the quarterfinals. So you know what, it might be a bit too high, but I'm still putting this side all the way at the top at S. They just aren't showing too much sign of weakness right now. Moving on to Gibraltar. I'll be brief with this one, but the only thing that's really worth noting is that they did not manage to bottle it against San Marino, while Liechtenstein did in their Nations League group. Yes, they drew with San Marino once, but the other time Gibraltar were able to defeat them. That was their only win the entire year. Other than that, pretty uneventful stuff, some close fights, but overall, quite disappointing. I'm sorry, Gibraltar, but I don't think it's much. I'm putting you at the bottom. Moving on to Greece. I think this one is definitely a debatable pick, as they were one of the teams in the Euro qualifier playoffs that failed to qualify. We talked about it earlier. They lost to Georgia on a penalty shootout. It was definitely wrong for them to underestimate Georgia. Maybe they were going through an all-time high confidence boost, as they did defeat Kazakhstan prior 5-0. Greece then had two friendlies before the Euro started, losing to Germany, but then defeated Malta. And they changed their manager to Ivan Jovanovic prior to the Nations League. And he definitely proved to be a fantastic fit, as they finished second in their group, even being able to defeat England one time while playing at Wembley. Convincing results against the other teams in their group, managing to keep clean sheets against both Ireland and Finland. It's definitely promising times for the Greece national team, and they finished this year on a high, despite losing to England one time in the Nations League 3-0. It's England at the end of the day. And like I said, they did beat them one of the times as well. I do think not qualifying for the Euros definitely has to haunt this national team down a tad bit. If it weren't for that, genuinely, I would put them a lot higher, but because of their slip to Georgia, even though it was just on penalties, I still think it's a massive blow for the nation. They're looking now towards the future, not focusing on the past, but still, analyzing all of 2024, I think Greece deserve a B. Moving on to Hungary. I think this side are a bit disappointed with how 2024 went for them. Expectations were very high, as going into the year they were on an undefeated streak. And they managed to win their first two friendlies of 2024, but then lost to Ireland. Then at the actual Euro tournament, when many said that they would be the dark horses, they crumbled. They finished third place, only being able to beat Scotland due to a stoppage time winner with 10 minutes of added time. They had to wait for all the other groups to finish to see if they would actually qualify for the next round in terms of the best third place teams, but they were far from amongst that, as they did pick up 2 losses. Then following that in the Nations League, they only picked up 1 win against Bosnia. 3 draws in total against each of the teams, but also lost to Germany and the Netherlands. They had a tough schedule, sure, but it's definitely not a 2024 Hungarians expected. I know they wanted a lot better. It really was down to the skin of the teeth in terms of qualifying for the knockouts in the Euros, but still, I think they underperformed. I'm going to put them at D. Let's move on to the country that ended Hungary's unbeaten streak though, Ireland. In the series of friendlies around that time frame, that was their only win, surprisingly. But they did have some tough opponents. And then in the Nations League, they were only able to be victorious over Finland narrowly. Ireland have proven that they have a promising golden generation for the future. Lots of exciting players coming up in the scene. But still this year, they didn't really assert themselves to really be a threat in football. So I'm sorry, Ireland. Best of luck in the future. But I'm putting you guys at D for 2024. All right, still going through countries starting with the letter I, just going a bit out of order. Next up, Iceland. Iceland traveled to Central America to pick up 2 wins early on in the year to prepare for the Euro qualifier playoffs, where they started off strong, defeating Israel 4-1. But right after that, they lost to Ukraine 2-1. Unfortunately, not qualifying for the Euros, they still made their stance, defeating England on a friendly match prior to the tournament, which definitely brought flashbacks for many fans. However, after that match, they had many scorelines which suggested that they definitely need to improve their defensive game. They definitely did catch some teams off guard though throughout the years. So honestly, this side had been a mixed bag. Overall, not so much success. I mean, they finished 3rd place in their Nations League group. But I think with them getting a massive win in the first round of the Euro qualifier playoffs, to them also being able to laugh at England just one more time, I'm going to bump this side up a bit higher than normal. I think they deserve to be at C. As yeah, obviously this is not their golden days anymore from the likes of 2016 and 2018 when they qualified for the World Cup and the Euros. So not much expectation was with this side to begin with, and they still put off some interesting results. Just definitely defensively, they were a mess at many moments. Moving on now to Italy. I think this side, along with Croatia, are disappointed with how they did at the Euros. I know they did qualify over Croatia to obviously advance to the knockouts on that final match day, but it really was down to the wire. And honestly, both Italians and Croatians were not happy with how they played throughout the group stage. And in the round of 16, Italy definitely underperformed against Switzerland, getting knocked out there. However, they did bounce back in the Nations League, showing off some convincing results, even being able to defeat France at one point. It was very even. Both these sides beat each other one time 3-1, were able to defeat Belgium head-to-head, and did not slip to Israel unlike other opponents. And although the year was not perfect, I wouldn't say it was necessarily the worst. Italy definitely needs to continue to improve, but they're obviously going through a transitional period and have some great talking points in their team. This is where we really saw the likes of Calafiori rise, and they have so many other great defensive options as we know. Now with Retegui being in incredible form, I see Italy doing much better things going into 2025, and I do see them finally qualifying for the World Cup. Now it really depends on how you want to weigh that disappointing Euro run. I think overall though, Italy shouldn't be too thrown off by this year. Obviously, given their standards, they should have done better as they were Euro champions prior, but I'm going to be generous to them and throw them at B. I mean, they did qualify for the knockouts at the end over Croatia, and they had some very promising Nations League results. So I think they bounced back very well and deserve to be at the B tier. Moving on out to Israel. Like I've just mentioned, Israel were in that very difficult Nations League group where they did plummet, but they did get a massive win against Belgium. Not much was expected from them in the first place, of course, but Israel have a lot of other results to show for this year. They were in the Euro qualifier playoffs where they did get destroyed, like I said, to Iceland, and then had 2 friendlies before the Euros, losing to Hungary, but then destroying Belarus. Maybe I'd be a bit more generous to them if they did not get destroyed by Iceland in those Euro qualifier playoffs. I know they had a tough schedule under their belt, but still, I think overall they deserve a D. They impressed at the end of the Nations League, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it was enough. Now taking a look at Kazakhstan. Unfortunately, this side had one of the worst years. They had such an incredible underdog run in 2023 for those Euro 2024 qualifiers, but in 2024 they set a new losing streak. They only grabbed 1 win at the very beginning of the year against Turkmenistan. Then they got destroyed by Greece 5-0, which just seemed to lose all their form and confidence. They could not win any more of their matches, including some doable friendlies, and then obviously struggled in their difficult Nations League group. 1 win, 1 draw, and 9 losses for Kazakhstan. Not good stuff. Definitely F tier. Very disappointing considering they were so good in 2023. Let's see if they can bounce back. Now taking a look at Liechtenstein, the only country that has lost to San Marino. Lost twice to them this year. They also had a terrible record in 2024. Their only win was a friendly against Hong Kong, where they won 1-0. I think overall it was a humiliating year for them. I know expectations weren't high, but they are easily at the F tier. Lithuania next. In the Nations League playoffs, they were able to beat Gibraltar narrowly head-to-head, beat Latvia in the Baltic Cup, and that's it. They didn't win a single one of their Nations League matches. They even lost to Cyprus every time they faced. Definitely not much expectation regardless, but I'm still putting them at the bottom tier. Luxembourg I was surprised by though. They were in the Euro qualifier playoffs, lost to Georgia at the beginning, okay, but after that they grabbed their only win the entire year against Kazakhstan. Sure, they weren't going to beat France and Belgium, but their Nations League group looked doable after their Euro qualifier performances. They struggled against every single one of the teams, finishing last place in the group with no wins. Maybe it's time for their long-serving manager Luke Holtz to go. Either way, Luxembourg definitely had a failure of a year for me. I'm putting them at F. I expected a lot better from them. For Latvia's case, sometimes this side loved to pull off some random upsets. But this year, they've only been able to beat the Faroe Islands on 2 separate occasions, the Baltic Cup third place match and the Nations League. Not too impressive considering they had some heavy losses. They even faced Liechtenstein in a friendly earlier in the year and failed to win in that match. It was a draw. So I'm putting them at F. Moving on to Malta, definitely between D or F for this side, as they do have a bit of diversity in terms of their win pool in 2024. They beat Liechtenstein, Moldova, and Andorra, and did pick up some interesting draws, including to Slovenia, but they did lose to Czechia 7-1. I'll be nicer to this minnow, I don't think it was the worst year ever. Definitely an interesting one, I'm going to put them at D. Although Moldova did lose to them, they did beat them the other time they faced, and overall had a solid record in 2024. They picked up 6 wins, 2 draws, and 2 losses. But they do get the award of the most random friendly scheduled, where they defeated Cayman Islands earlier in the year 4-0. Regardless, it was still an impressive year for Moldova to mostly grab wins. It's something the other minnows in UEFA cannot really say they've done. After their impressive Euro qualifier campaign prior, despite not qualifying, it seems like they're continuing the momentum overall. I know they had easier fixtures, but given Moldova's standards, I mean their only massive loss was to Ukraine, which was 4-0. To me, it's either a B or A. I don't know if I can necessarily justify they achieved heights compared to likes of Austria, Georgia, and France. I'm going to put them at B. Moving on to Montenegro. Montenegro overall had an underwhelming year. Montenegro this year unfortunately lost one of their players, their goalkeeper Šarkić, who did play in that friendly against Belgium this year. Definitely a tough year for this nation, and the results didn't really go to plan for them. Only winning 2 of their friendlies earlier on, and then the final match of 2024 against Turkey, which was definitely shocking as Turkey looked to be the ones to top their Nations League group, but Montenegro halted them, scoring 3 against them as well. Krstovic getting a hat-trick in that match. Definitely a nice way to end 2024, but overall, too many lows for Montenegro, I think. Overall, not the best year for Montenegro, but definitely had some spurts of hope. Definitely not a failure of a year by any means, just still could be a bit better. I think they deserve a D. Moving on out to Macedonia. People from this nation will definitely be happy with how this year went as they topped their Nations League group by quite a convincing point difference. They only drew once to the Faroe Islands in that campaign, but unfortunately for them in all their friendlies prior, they failed to grab a single win. And some of their opponents were definitely doable. They had to take on the likes of Moldova and Montenegro. So unfortunately when this side was tested elsewhere, they did crumble, but overall obviously that Nations League result is a big boost for them. So I think at the end of the day, they deserve a B. If they got more wins from those friendlies, I'd probably bump them up to A, but Nations League topping that group is still fantastic from them. Wow, I just made it all the way here and realized I forgot about England. They just happen to be amongst the last teams on this order of the tier list, that's why. Sorry about that. Anyway, let's get into them. Euro finalists. When many people are not happy with the way they played, just scraping through in many matches, they still did wonders in that tournament, consistently proving people wrong in the knockouts. Now say what you want about this side, there was definitely a lot of criticism with them at the Euro tournament, as they scraped through so many matches, but at the end of the day, they still made it to the final. They did have to rely on some key moments, but those key moments were brilliant as well, like that Jude Bellingham bicycle kick in stoppage time to equalize against Slovakia. It's crazy that they were in that position in the first place, but still, everyone doubted them against Switzerland, they advanced over them on penalties, they beat a top team like the Netherlands, and narrowly lost to Spain in the actual final. But that was not England's only loss. We talked about it earlier, they also lost to Iceland, they lost to Brazil in a friendly in March, and they lost to Greece at Wembley. So if they ended up winning the Euro trophy and it came home, I would obviously put this side at S, but I still think they showed some flaws throughout the year. Regardless, they should be proud, and now they have new management with Tuchel, so it's going to be interesting to see what he can do coming up with these World Cup qualifiers and the actual tournament. But in 2024 specifically, what they had with Southgate and under their interim taker as well, I'm going to be putting England at A. Anyway, let's move on to the Netherlands now. The Netherlands made it to the semi-finals of the Euros, getting knocked out to England. And although they made it so far, I think they also showed their flaws throughout the tournament. Not the most convincing side under Koeman. Yes, they pulled off the results, but they finished third in their Euro group. With the defensive quality they have on paper, I would expect them to hold off better than they did. This side are amazing on paper, don't get me wrong. I just feel like they could be even better with proper management. Koeman's not perfect, but still, they had a solid year, and I think they deserve to be at A. Norway, who failed to qualify for Euro 2024, still made quite a stance this year. They lost their earliest friendly to Czechia and then drew with Slovakia, beat Kosovo right before the Euros, but then lost to Denmark quite heavily. But then in the Nations League, they had an interesting campaign, topping their group, despite losing to Austria 5-1. That 5-1 loss was a massive wake-up call as they were able to defeat Slovenia 4-1 and then Kazakhstan 5-0. So clearly the attack is clicking. Holland is breaking records for the national team, of course, but I still think they're lacking consistency overall. Not to mention, I think they did get a bit lucky that Austria were halted on the final match day of the Nations League, drawing with Slovenia. If they weren't, they probably would have topped the group instead. But still, it's a fantastic achievement for Norway. I still think they were quite inconsistent this year. Should have won some of those friendlies earlier as well, but I still think overall they have a lot to look forward to. Hopefully they finally qualify for an international tournament, the World Cup coming up. We have to see Holland at something. Regardless though, I'm going to be putting them at B. Let's move on out to Northern Ireland. This team caught me off guard. They were in really poor form, but in 2024, they only picked up 2 losses. One of them was a massive one against Spain, but still, it's Spain. The other was to Bulgaria. And the other time they faced Bulgaria in the Nations League, they defeated them 5-0. They topped this Nations League group and are proving to have a very solid foundation of young players that can flourish later on. So Northern Ireland looked to be on track going into 2025. I was very wrong about them. I thought that they would crumble in this Nations League group, but they very much flourished, and I'm going to be giving them a very high ranking because they really caught me off guard, putting them all the way up at A. Polska next. They were in the Euro qualifier playoffs, just narrowly doing it there. They destroyed Estonia on the first match day, but against Wales they advanced on penalties. Nothing to be ashamed of, but in the actual tournament they did finish bottom. Also, kind of hard to judge them there because it was such a difficult group, and they put off some good fights. I would have given them a lot more sympathy, but I was disappointed in them in their Nations League campaign. They finished bottom of their group. I know it was a tricky one, but I think they could have at least fought for third, and they fell short to even Scotland. They also conceded 8 goals in total to Portugal and showed a lot of defensive issues, as they failed to keep a clean sheet in 11 matches. Their last clean sheet was that playoff match against Wales that I mentioned earlier. They won their 2 friendlies before the Euros, so obviously a lot of fans were excited for this team, but I think overall they were disappointing. Going through a transition as well without Szczesny, I still think they have fantastic keepers to back them up, but might take them some time to gel with the national team. Unfortunately, I would put Poland a lot higher if they at least finished third in the Nations League group, but they finished bottom. I'm putting them at D. Moving on to Portugal, they made it to the Euro quarterfinals, but surprisingly were not that explosive in goal at the actual tournament. We didn't see Ronaldo score at all, even missing penalties against Slovenia, but they pushed through on penalties against them, just failed to do so against France. Still, they secured first place in their group, and they also topped their Nations League group, getting results like defeating Poland 5-1, where we saw Ronaldo redeem himself from those Euro performances, scoring a bicycle kick. Portugal definitely could have achieved more under Roberto Martinez, but I still think it was an alright year for them. Should have strived more for those Euros, and definitely question marks in terms of the attack there, but they have a solid future ahead of them and one of the most promising squads right now. So I'm going to be giving Portugal an A. Moving on now to Romania. Romania were doubted by many in Euro 2024 to have quite any progression, yet they topped their group over Belgium, Ukraine, and Slovakia. Yes, they shared the same amount of points at the end, but they thoroughly deserved to top the group, only losing to Belgium and demolishing Ukraine on the first match day 3-0. Unfortunately, in the round of 16, they had to face the Netherlands and got outclassed 3-0. But what they achieved in the group stage is definitely a solid mark, and not to mention, they also topped their Nations League group. Sure, you can say that their group was somewhat of a piece of cake on paper. However, there's no denying that Romania had a fantastic 2024. Of course, I'm sure they wish to progress further at the actual Euro tournament, but they had a tough opponent in the round of 16. I think that they still should have finished this year with a lot of honor. I'm going to be putting them all the way up at A. Their friendlies prior to the Euro tournament were a bit questionable. They picked up a draw against Liechtenstein, but their only actual loss was against Colombia, which somehow finished in a 3-2 thriller. Either way, I feel like Romania fans are very confident going into 2025 for the World Cup qualifiers. under Lucescu, it will be interesting to see if they can achieve more heights. Now moving on to a country that is still banned by playing in any qualifier campaigns, European tournaments, Russia. They still have been playing loads of friendlies. And you know what? You can argue that they've had a better 2024 than any other national team. They didn't concede a single goal, and they demolished every single team they faced, including getting an 11-0 victory against Brunei. Honestly, with the criteria as in terms of the players, they can't really do much about not being able to play in European tournaments, in European qualifiers. They didn't do anything wrong. They could technically be at S. However, I feel like a lot of these friendlies were not weighed the highest. Even some of their oppositions didn't necessarily throw in their strongest lineups. I'll just give Russia an A. Moving on now to San Marino. Let's keep in mind before we actually give this side a grade, they are ranked as the worst national team in the entire world. Yet, they grabbed 2 wins this year, something that they have never achieved in their lifetimes. Sure, it was against the same opponent, Liechtenstein. However, with San Marino standards, this is massive news, and obviously, the nation absolutely celebrated after being able to be victorious, as they also topped their Nations League group, which means they will be promoted to League C. Sure, their other results were not great. They failed to beat St. Kitts and Nevis either time they faced, and they conceded 4 to Slovakia and Cyprus. But again, this is San Marino. What a year this side have had. I know it's just 2 wins against not the greatest national team, but we gotta consider what an achievement it is for this nation. It wasn't a perfect year. I feel like they could have at least defeated one more national team. However, it is still a massive boost for me to bump them all the way up to the A tier. Next up, Scotland. Unfortunately, this side were statistically the worst out of any of the Euro 2024 countries participating. They picked up 1 draw and 2 losses with the worst goal difference out of any of the countries, as they got crushed by Germany 5-1 on the opening match day, which really set them back. In the Nations League, they were put in a tough group as they were in League A, but they put off some good fights at the beginning, just narrowly losing to the likes of Poland 3-2, Portugal and Croatia 2-1. They managed to draw with Portugal the next time around, but they hadn't won a match in so long at this point. However, on the final international break of 2024, they grabbed 2 wins against Croatia and Poland, which saved them from finishing last place in their Nations League group as well. Definitely somewhat of a boost despite doing it late. In the friendlies prior to the Euros, they only beat Gibraltar. So Scotland actually only picked up 3 wins the entire calendar year. However, I still think they somewhat saved themselves from necessarily having a failure of a year. A lot of work is to be done. We need to see more form like we did at the first half of the Euro qualifiers, but that was unfortunately in 2023. In 2024, they definitely slowed down, just kind of saved themselves at the end. I'm going to be putting this nation at D. Moving on now to Serbia. Serbia, unfortunately, I hate to say it, were underwhelming in 2024. With all the quality they have, they still seem to be tactically lost. Pixie implemented new styles to his game, less attacking based despite having so many star forwards, more defensive minded, yet he still seemed to struggle at Euro 2024. Only 1 goal was scored against Slovenia, and it was a stoppage time equalizer from Luka Jovic. Vlahovic and Mitrovic failed to get on the score sheet at all, and obviously they got grouped. Prior to the Euros, it was back and forth type of friendlies. They definitely did not play their strongest team against Russia though. Their only massive achievement in all of 2024 is the fact that they finally beat Switzerland. Yes, this side were haunting them for quite some time. In the last 2 World Cups, these countries built a rivalry thanks to these 2 lads. Even in the Nations League, this match was still heated, but Serbia were the ones to get the last laugh, beating them at home at one point and then drawing when they had to travel away. To be fair, I'm being a bit harsh. They also did pick up a draw against Spain right after this country won the Euros. Unfortunately though, the next time they faced, they got annihilated 3-0. They also lost to Denmark 2-0 at one point, but also picked up a point against this nation. It is impressive that Serbia were able to survive in League A. I feel like a lot of people ruling out this side because it was a difficult group, but still they only picked up 1 win in the entire campaign. And like I said in the Euros, they did go winless. If they at least finished in 2nd place in their Nations League group, I would definitely bump them up higher, or got at least some more wins, had a more electric display at the Euros, but it really was lacking from this side. They were a bit dull to watch at the actual Euro tournament. I'm unfortunately going to have to put this side at D. Moving on now to Slovakia. Slovakia, like I mentioned earlier, did defeat Belgium on the opening day of the Euros. They finished third place in their group, sharing points with everyone else like I mentioned, as the only side they lost to in the group stage was Ukraine. They had to face England in the round of 16 and nearly pull off some brilliance. They were about to beat them 1-0 until Jude Bellingham scored in the 95th minute with the bicycle kick. Regardless, I think this tournament has shown that this side is extremely underrated and you cannot underestimate them going forward. I mean, Ivan Stranz was one of the top joint goal scorers of the tournament. In the Nations League, they finished second place, just falling short to Sweden, who we'll get into later. But yeah, they unfortunately collapsed to get promoted in the Nations League. This is definitely an underrated national team, and I think they had a fantastic year. But some of their results, I feel like they weren't necessarily the most explosive or convincing. Of course, they did the job many times, but sometimes narrowly putting off results thanks to defensive errors from other teams. Granted, these were giants, but we saw it against likes of Belgium, even against England at the beginning. No discredit to them, of course, but due to the fact that they finished third place in their Euro group. I know they shared points with everyone else, but still. And also they failed to top their Nations League group. I'm going to put this side at B. I still think it was a fantastic year, just not enough to throw them at A. Another interesting country to analyze though is Slovenia. This side also made it to the round of 16 of the Euros after advancing without picking up a single win or loss. Only draws in their group. They play without a doubt an incredible defensive game. And we even saw it in the round of 16 as they were able to massively frustrate Portugal. The match finished 0-0 and had to go to penalties. We even saw Ronaldo miss a penalty in that match. Unfortunately, in the actual shootout, all their players missed their penalties, allowing Portugal to advance. But it was still one of the most fascinating runs in the tournament, despite them getting knocked out in the first round of knockouts. But something interesting about this nation is prior to the Euro tournament, they picked up some massive wins in friendlies. They weren't able to beat Malta or Bulgaria, but they defeated the United States, Portugal, and Armenia. In the Nations League following the Euro tournament, they were able to hold off Austria for 2 draws, but they got destroyed by Norway both times they faced, conceding a total of 7 goals. I think that was their massive slip. I do think it was a solid year for Slovenia though, just not at the greatest of heights. I think B is totally fair for this nation though. Now moving on to Sweden. It looked to be dark times for Sweden going into 2024 as they just failed to qualify for the Euro Championship. Even in their friendlies at the beginning of the year, they were only able to beat Albania and Estonia. But in the second half of the year, things really started clicking. In their Nations League group, they scored 2 goals minimum in every single one of their matches. And we really saw their attack flourish with Isak, Kulusevski, and Viktor Gyökeres. And yes, they topped their group. I think Sweden definitely finished 2024 on a high note. It was just challenging times at the beginning. Definitely not convincing friendly results, but I think they found their footing once again. Not a perfect year still, but definitely finishing on a high note, so I'll put them at B. Moving on now to Switzerland, who definitely get a big boost as they did make it to the quarterfinals of Euro 2024, getting knocked out by England on penalties. But in the round of 16, they defeated Italy. They also held off Germany to a draw in the group stage. Even in their friendlies prior to the tournament, they remained undefeated. It looked to be an incredible year for the Swiss, but unfortunately for them in the Nations League, they really crumbled. They finished last place with no wins at all. Like I mentioned, Serbia were finally able to beat them. In their first cycle of matches, their first 3, they really got outplayed by every single one of the teams. 2-0 to Denmark and Serbia, and 4-1 to Spain. They put off much better fights in the second half, drawing with Denmark and Serbia, and just losing by 1 goal against Spain, finishing 3-2 the score. I was a bit surprised the Swiss crumbled so hard, but I definitely think this Nations League performance puts them down a tier at least. I would have put them probably at A had everything gone to plan. I still think this side should not necessarily be happy that they finished last place in their Nations League group, so I'm going to bump them down to B, just considering they still had a fantastic Euro tournament. Moving on out to the Euro champion Spain. Of course, this side are going to be at the S tier. Not only did they obviously win the tournament, they were one of the most deserving winners. They played so well in every single one of their matches. They scored a total of 15 goals. They had a tough road to the final as well. I think this is without a doubt an S, and you can't even argue that this nation deserved their own tier. They even topped their Nations League group. Their only loss the entire calendar year was a friendly at the beginning to Colombia, 1-0. Moving on now to Turkey. You can't argue that this side were the dark horses of Euro 2024 as they made it all the way to the quarterfinals, finishing second in their group, defeating Austria, who many people are rating highly in that tournament after they did top their own group. Unfortunately for them in the quarterfinals, they narrowly lost to Netherlands, despite putting off a great fight. After Euro 2020, Turkish fans knew to be silent going into this tournament, which was definitely the right call, as this time they truly were, I think, the dark horses. However, their Nations League group looked to be somewhat of a piece of cake, and they failed to top it. As on the final 2 match days, they failed to beat Wales and then also lost to Montenegro heavily. That's the problem with this side. When you expect things from them, they just randomly don't deliver. And then when you rule them out, they love to shine. I think they also really came to be a shock at the Euro 2024 tournament, as their friendlies prior were really not good. They didn't win a single one of their matches, only being able to draw with Italy, but they lost to Austria 6-1. Another reason why it was shocking that they did beat them in the round of 16. Regardless of those random slips, I think that Euro 2024 weight is so high for this national team. And this tournament really solidified the future of the Turkish national team. And a lot of eyes are on them once again. Will that backfire? Who knows? But in 2024, despite slipping in the Nations League, I think this side still deserve an A. They finished second in their group still. It's not like they absolutely flopped the entire competition. Moving on to Ukraine. Ukraine was the unfortunate one in that group where everyone shared points at the Euros that finished at last. But they were part of the Euro qualifier playoffs, which happened in 2024, where they did get 2 2-1 victories in their path against Bosnia and Iceland. And in the Euro tournament, they had a horrific start, losing to Romania 3-0. They scored all their goals against Slovakia, as it was a goalless draw against Belgium. In the Nations League, they weren't in the easiest group, but still a doable one, and they had a slow start, losing to Albania on the first match day, and then Czechia 3-2. But they bounced back with 2 draws and 2 wins, which put them at second place. I think it's a mixed year for Ukraine. Obviously, they'll be happy to qualify for the Euro tournament, but their performances in it definitely were also a bit unlucky to be the first side in Euro history to finish last place with 4 points. I'm going to give this side a tad bit of benefit. I think they deserve at least a C. Moving on now to Wales, the side to actually top their Nations League group over Turkey. Definitely this side kept their composure and proved to be in some very solid form to be a threat at the World Cup qualifiers. However, this was a difficult year for the Welsh national team as they failed to qualify for the Euros via the playoffs, losing to Poland on penalties on the final round. Prior, they defeated Finland 4-1. It wasn't their only explosive win. They also defeated Iceland 4-1 on the last Nations League match day. Their only questionable loss was to Slovakia in June, where they lost 4-0 in a friendly. Although it was unfortunate, failing to qualify for the Euros via penalties, still, at the end of the day, it was a bit of a failure for the nation. I think they bounced back well though, topping their Nations League group. I'm going to be putting Wales at B. And the last team we're looking at, because I failed to put them in earlier due to how I named each of the files on this tier list, we're going to be taking a look at Kosovo before we finish this video. Kosovo won head-to-head battles with Cyprus and Lithuania in their Nations League group. In fact, they destroyed Cyprus, scoring 7 goals against them in total. But the Romanians got the best of them. Even on the final match day, the Balkan behavior went Romania's way. Their friendlies prior to the Euros, they only were able to defeat Armenia. They lost to Norway 3-0 and Hungary 2-0. For the youngest ever UEFA national team, I think it was an alright year. We already knew that they were failing to qualify for the Euros, so honestly, decent stuff in the Nations League. They did just get humiliated to Romania and Norway, so when they come against, those more decent national teams, this side still are prone to crumbling, but definitely decent foundation to continue forward. I'm going to be putting Kosovo at C. Well, there you have it, guys. That's my complete tier list for all the UEFA national teams on how they performed in 2024. Like I said, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe if you're new, and big plans coming for 2025. I will see you all very, very soon. Happy New Year. Take care. Laku noć.